Lynette D'Amico is the author of a new memoir that came out this week, Men I Hate. We will talk about that title, of course, because it is a provocation. And then I just wanted to mention that some people may also be familiar with Lynette's husband, P. Carl's memoir, Becoming a Man, which has received a lot of attention. And in many ways, Men I Hate tells Lynette's side of the story and is also a gorgeously written memoir and essays about the formation of her lesbian identity and how Carl's transition complicated that identity. She asks herself the question, can a lesbian who loves a trans man still call herself a lesbian? Which is something we're going to talk about. After surviving coming of age in a traditionally gendered Sicilian American household, how does she make sense of men? And what does it mean to love a man? She and Carl's relationship persists despite Lynette's intention to coast to the end of life. No boys allowed. That was something that I put in the thing that we had. What is your reaction to that introduction?
Oh, that's great, to start us out. I I have a thing on my screen. Am I the only one who can see that? Oh, there. Okay. I just moved it.
Mhm.
Alright, but I just wanna say thank you again. I'm very thrilled, to be here. But, you know, in regard to the title, I got a lot of, pushback on the title originally. I, I w I wanted to call all the essays Men I Hate. I thought it was like a joke, to me. And then I was in a writing group, a long-term writing group, and there were a couple of guys in the group, and they were like, "How many of these Men I Hate things are we gonna have to read?" You know? And so I took pity on them.
Were these straight men?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. And, like, had to clarify for myself, like, what was the point of writing toward a or with a title, Men I Hate, and, it's one, it gave me some focus, you know, to start every essay sort of with that question, and then I it pushed me to clarify for myself, what am I talking about?
Yeah.
And, I found in the process of, writing these essays that there it was like the book cover. If you've seen the book cover, which of course I don't have a copy, it
I'll get my copy. It's, actually right around the corner. I don't wanna have to lean over,
I
but yeah.
know Men I Hate is very prominent, and then as like a shadow in the background, it says Men I Love, and the process of writing the book is illustrated in that cover. Like, the cover is, just it's a perfect, like, crystallization of what the book's about. It starts with hate and rage, and it sort of evolves to how do we do a better job as humans,
Mhm.
as partners, as, in caring for one another that, maybe goes around identity and gender a bit. So
So I was actually thinking about even just the word hate recently because I was thinking about how when I was a kid, my mom wouldn't let us say the word. It was a bad word. Like
yeah,
we weren't allowed to say I hate you to my sisters or my brother. It was just a word that was forbidden. Like we also weren't allowed to say liar. We weren't allowed to say shut up. We weren't allowed to say a lot of things. So just even the word hate has a lot of baggage, right?
right, like the word stupid. Yeah.
Right.
When I was growing up, it was hate and stupid. Yeah.
And so what does it mean to be able to let yourself use that word?
Well, it it was very freeing, in terms of, you know, getting thoughts on the page, and because there was so much resistance to the title, not from my publisher at all, who really, like, they read the whole thing, but, from friends and from other writer, friends that I, it it opened up something for me that I don't I don't have to couch this in language that is polite or inclusive or, you know, I don't have to worry if I offend somebody.
Right.
I mean, I'm okay if I do, and then I'm willing to have a conversation with you about it, you know? And it just it opened to a door to a discovery process for me that, the hate and the rage, which is very much part of my Sicilian cultural tradition, was also just a screen to feeling, you know, vulnerable and open-hearted and, you know, well, what is it gonna mean if I love a man?
Right.
You know, like, uh
So there's a certain way of thinking about this, I have to admit, like, about 20 years ago was the first time it actually came up in my brain of this idea of legibility, right? And that if you identify as a lesbian or a gay man, and then you are in a relationship that doesn't look to be same gendered or isn't legible in some way, that people then can reject you, especially within your community. And the first time I was interviewing, a black lesbian who fell in love with a trans man, and she said all her lesbian friends abandoned her because they're like, "You're not a lesbian anymore." And in some ways, that's what you're grappling with, in a different way, because you and Carl had been together for 20 years in, what was presented as a lesbian relationship, and you were married, as in that way, and then it changed, and you had to grapple with that between each other first before both of you grappled with this in words and publishing stories about it, which
Yeah.
is another side of that process. So what happened with your friends and with everybody? Like, was there shame around that, or
Oh, yeah, it was, you know, well, with my friends, there was a lot of, "What are you doing?" You know? Like, "How are you gonna identify yourself now?" A lot of, conversation over a lot of bottles of wine that, you know, "You get to call yourself whatever you want," you know, and if this isn't who you wanna be, like, in a hetero-looking marriage, like, it's time to jump ship, you know? And, I have a group of friends who are all Italian queers.
Mhm.
Oh my god. And, we had they were, like, ready to, um, you know, "You're gonna come, you're gonna live in the spare room, we're gonna take care of you, we'll feed you, you don't have to go through this. Carl can be a man wherever he wants to be a man, you know, you don't have to be a wife."
Right.
And I, you know, there was a period of time where everything was, say, uh, up in the air and a little bit of a confusion, um, that, you know, I used to say that I was only, like, visibly queer with a lover,
Mhm.
that I was more identified as femme, I was more or less, you know, straight passing at the time, whatever that meant, and then, you know, unless, like, I was hanging on a girl or a girl was hanging on me, um, I really liked that contrast. I I like the double takes and the second looks, I
Yeah.
like being, like, with a lover, publicly queer, and, and then that difference was erased, that, you know, nobody gave me and Carl a second look, you know, and I miss that. I mean, some of that happens naturally as you get older.
Being middle-aged and people don't care.
Yeah. Yes, but, you know but, you know, that was not part of a life change that I anticipated for
Right.
myself. Um, and it was not like Carl having top surgery, you know, that flipped me. We had a breast wishes party, and it was great, and it wasn't the pronoun change or the name change. There was some stumbling and fumbling initially, and we, worked through that. There was a lot of legal expense, but, you know, to have that all those gender markers, changed from official documents, but the hormones, the testosterone, it changed him physically, and in a way that, like, top surgery did not, in
Mhm.
a way that always, getting his hair cut at a barber, did not. It it flipped us both a little bit, and and then everything, I had thought about men or I thought about women was, um was up for grabs, and that's what I tried to explore
Yeah.
in the book, you know?
Tell me, I mean, one, what it sounds like you were exploring also was a sort of grief when you were going through these transitions, right? Like, even the idea of
Mm,
a comical breast wishes, you're also grieving that you're losing something.
mhm. The as Carl is celebrating his new body, his new identity, his, new name, I, was glum and dumb in the corner, I was like, "Oh, so this is you're gonna, walk on the outside curb now. You're gonna open car doors. You're gonna be the one that drive every." Okay, maybe this isn't necessarily true for a lot of trans men, but he reveled in the fact that of feeling like a man in his body and being perceived as a man in the world, which meant treating me like a girl.
Right.
And, you know, that wasn't my thing.
Yeah.
And so, we it felt like stepping on his joy to process, my grief with him. So then it became a time of his therapist, my therapist, a little couples counseling, and also some time apart,
Yeah.
so that he could, do figure out what he needed to do, and I could figure out, like, it, can I live like this?
Mhm.
What did that mean? You know? And when we came back together, um, nothing was easy, I'll say, but when we came back together, there were some definite, sort of touchstones about what kept us together, and it was more than, like, the longevity of our relationship. I mean, that was certainly part of it, but it wasn't so much, like, who remembered what, how, like, who was right.
Mhm.
We had to let go of some of that because some of the memories that I thought we shared had been, really difficult for him,
Yeah.
you know, um, or not at all, honest or true to how he was feeling at the time. But when we got to a point where we could stop arguing about whose retrospection was the most accurate and
Mm.
stop arguing until we both fell over in exhaustion and come to a place where we might have different versions of the same story,
Right.
and we might have to agree to live with that, and can we do that? And we
Is is part of, your essay writing, your exploration of this, also recording that because it is gonna change, that you wanted to sort of, in a way, empower those memories of yours, and interpret them the way you felt instead of just letting one be dominant?
No, it initially, yeah, it was like, "Well, I'm telling my story, damn it," and because, you know, nobody else is, and then it was and I did, and when I would share that material, I was getting responses that, you know, "Have you considered your husband's position? Have you talked to him about how much of his story that it's okay for you to share?" Which, okay, made me lose my mind. I was like, I have to ask his permission, but that's not at all what that meant. It
Mhm.
was that if you write about anybody else, any family member, friend, close relationships, um, you have to consider what's at stake here in telling part of their story. And what do you have? Not so much a formal position, permission to say or do, but what what can you live with, and what are you? Do you want to maintain this relationship?
Right.
You know, and it did not occur to me, even at my advanced age, and after so many years together, that there there might be other stories, that my version was not the primary story, and that, it was really important for me to, consider that, um, and not just by talking to Carl, but by, like, sort of an imaginative, um, access to what was this for him.
Mhm. But
Yeah.
at the same time, it is your story, right? And and so how did you get to that point? Because obviously Carl's book came out first and now your book is out, and I always think there's a special place for the partners and spouses and friends of, uh, personal essay writers, memoirists, because the ones who allow us to share stories, and they can disagree with it, but they also say, "Well, you're the one telling the story, and I am I'm never going to write," right? So, but to have 2 writers, dueling stories is a more complicated thing, right? Because it does get competitive.
It well, it didn't feel competitive to us. It was Carl got a lot of questions when his book came out about, "W what about Lynette's story?" And, it hadn't occurred to me so much that I was gonna say anything about anything, you know? And, and then I thought, I have to do some of this work if we're gonna stay together. And mm, so I started exploring that a little bit, and I didn't know how far I was gonna get. Maybe I'd be one story, one essay and done, you know? And I kept finding that this there was like an engine for me to look at not just my history with Carl, but my history with men, like, sort of throughout, men in, my family, my
Right.
friends. Yeah. And that was useful for me, useful and valuable. And I found ways that I could enter the subject, without um blaming Carl,
Mhm.
which I really like. This wasn't anything he was at fault about, you know.
I think what it sounds like I'm hearing as well, and correct me if I'm getting it off, but one of the things I talk to people when they're working on their essays, when I'm teaching it or when I'm editing, is did you go into this thinking you knew the answer, or did you go in this with a question and you were trying to look for an answer, right? And you can normally tell because it sounds like maybe at the beginning we often are like, I need to get this out because I'm angry, or and I just need to tell you
Yeah,
what I think about this. And
yeah.
then when we have time to reflect, we can actually question and say, "Okay, but what did I get wrong here? Or what are the other ways of looking at this?"
Mhm. I, I didn't think I necessarily knew anything, and then the thought of doing like, writing these essays, do I have to do even more research into variations of masculinity? And, um, I wasn't that interested, you know? I've been living with it, and, but I I wrote to sort of figure out what was I thinking, you know? How was I thinking about this, and what were other areas that I wanted to explore? And, also, you know, how how is it possible to be respectful to the people that you're writing about or
Right.
writing, you know, um, toward again, you know, that because I wouldn't presume to tell Carl's, story. That was one thing I was careful about. Um, I but I'd say there were a lot of drafts.
Of
How
course.
could you know? Um, and I employed some strategies about, protecting other people or, protecting myself a little bit about,
Yeah.
which you can change, names and locations. You can change dates, you can smooth over the story you want to tell. You can, use a lot of qualifiers to the best of my recollection as, I remember. Um, but but I do think those are techniques or strategies to employ when you're in, like, a revision stage. I think it's really good to, like, just spew,
Mhm.
know, and then but not to show it to too many people, you know? Just to show it to your most trusted readers, the people who are gonna support you no matter what, but not to try and, like, "Well, this is so hot to go. I gotta show this to my agent right off the bat," you know? You gotta sit with it for a
Mhm.
bit. I think, it when I started writing, um, it didn't occur to me, to consider, like, what do we owe the people we're writing about,
Right.
you know? Or what is the line between my story and my husband's story? Um, you know, I was pretty desperate to tell my story besides, talking to a therapist who, I mentioned that I'm not the most comfortable public speaker. And even in therapy, my dear therapist would say, Lynette, you got to use words. You gotta say things out loud. and, but, you know, I wanted to like I didn't wanna, like, give up on this marriage. I didn't wanna
Right.
give up even on the, like, exploration of how was I gonna come out of this? Who was I gonna be, next? Um, I was I had questions, and, my friends had questions, "How are you feeling about your husband's gender transition? Are you still gay?" All that, and, but I think if you're desperate to tell a story, whether you're thinking of how it's gonna be received or not, that's a great place to start.
Yeah.
That's a great place to start on the page, you know?
So I for people who haven't maybe had a chance to read it yet, I know you had a selection from Stasi Men that you wanted to read, which I think is great. I also just wanted to, before we went there, is say, when I was selecting an excerpt, I was wondering if you were surprised at the one that I did, which is your crush on Linda Ronstadt. But part of it was because I didn't want to do a disservice to have to shrink down the parts about you and Carl, and I felt like that in a way gave us an access to you in a way that didn't have as much baggage, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah.
And it was also just really sweet and intense, and I, also feel like Linda doesn't get enough love anymore. So
And she put it like she and Judy Garland and Elizabeth Taylor, who I also write about, they're such gay icons,
Yeah.
you know? Like, yeah. No, that was perfect, Jerry.
So do you wanna read that section that you
Oh, sure. Um, Here we are. All right. This is from an essay called The Stasi Men that was published in Guernica magazine. All the dogs in Berlin had the same face, a wiry, bearded face with intelligent eyes and perked ears. None of the dogs paid me the slightest bit of attention, even though I was so dog hungry, missing our Labradoodle and yellow lab back home in Boston. The German dogs trotted with purpose and never veered from the path to chase a duck or leap into the water or bark to say hi or keep away. This is what it means to be a good dog in Berlin. It was 2018, and my husband and I were living in Berlin, where he was on an academic fellowship and I was there as spouse of. My position relegated me to the outer circle of the big headed fellows, which was fine with me. It was part of the story of our relationship. He was a front guy. I preferred to watch the scene around me. We were also there to try and put our marriage back together following my husband's gender transition from a queer woman to a man, which began 2 years earlier in 2016. How would it be to live someplace where nobody knew our specific relationship history or had known us in a previous incarnation as a queer couple? Were we still a queer couple? The hope was that in a setting where somebody was cooking and cleaning for us, we would stop fighting about whose turn it was to vacuum and what's for dinner and get to the big fights, such as were we going to stay married? At the table. At the obligatory group dinner every night, a dreamy Italian German waiter pulled out the chairs for all the women and poured endless glasses of wine with his hand over his heart. I felt lit up in the spotlight of his beautiful service. He was soft spoken and had a delicious accent. He greeted me with warmth and eagerness, anticipated my needs, and spoke to me as though he were kissing my hand. He was my favorite. My husband sat with his elbows on the table, chatting up his fellow fellows about digital philosophy and Balkan politics and the 15th century Ottoman Empire. To reduce the gender transition to being in the wrong flesh bag, in my experience, is problematic. If the condemned recanted, the person was strangled before the fire was lit. A mercy execution. Neoliberalism is about the individual, not the group. The questions we carried. There were two single women among the fellows. When I wanted to get my girl on, we sneaked cigarettes and complimented each other's wardrobe selections. I love your shoes. I love your shoes. My husband called them my lesbian girlfriends. They were my favorites. My husband liked to dress in streetwear and overpriced sneakers. He was peppy and happy and filled with joy. Before the transition, he never sweated. In Berlin, he sweat and sweat like a hairy sweating man. He was proud of his sweat. Look at this sweat, he said at the dinner table, happily sweating. As conversations went on around me, I nodded agreeably left and right, chewing and swallowing my German meaty meat meals. Pink boar's meat ravioli, twice cooked venison, mussels with fennel and blood oranges, lamb's lettuce with grape and bacon vinaigrette. If anybody asked me anything directly, I panicked into muteness. Your husband says you like to cook. Maybe you can take a cooking class during your time in Berlin. Perhaps you are interested in cheese culture. What are the runes of capitalism? Every table conversation felt like an interview for a job I was not going to get. My husband's question for me was, could I love a man, specifically him? I had the same question for myself. I mean, you love the person, not a body, not a gender. And what did it matter after nearly 20 years together? People stay married for all kinds of reasons. My husband and I had a joint bank account. We shared an aesthetic sensibility, except for my disdain for streetwear and sneakers. We were both Italian. We weren't going to break up, were we? What country is this? What is the point of these mandatory group dinners? Asked a visiting scholar. To enjoy each other's company, I said, my mouth full of the most delicious plum torte made with the tiny blue-green plums that were in season right that minute. In a conversation about the varieties of gender, the visiting scholar, a journalist, said they had always felt like a boy but had learned how to be a girl. They'd had a double mastectomy and then breast reconstruction and were now taking testosterone. They described their relationship to this new body as the way one would think of inhabiting a new country. I wondered about the experience of being in relationship to a new body in a new country, like an American lesbian married to a man in Berlin. A personal American disaster. My husband started testosterone shortly after the 2016 American presidential election, and I couldn't seem to separate the political disaster of our country from the ongoing personal disaster. I couldn't bear to listen to the news. I couldn't stop listening to the news. I had never felt so implicated by the news, by what white men in America were doing. As a queer woman in America, I thought I had sorted out my personal and political affiliations with gender years before. I mostly didn't pay attention to men unless I loved them, like my father and my nephews and a few dear friends, or they were interrupting me or talking over me or hitting on me or threatening me or taking up too much space or in my way. They didn't get my time or energy or attention. Now men were impossible to ignore. Day after day, I would open my computer, resolved to delete my social media accounts, and then not delete them. Day after day, I would read my husband's latest Facebook post about navigating the men's bathroom, about drinking bourbon at a bar with other men drinking bourbon, about being called sir and boss, buddy and bro. How does it feel to be straight? He joked to me. We're like a hetero couple now. Nothing is funny to me. For 20 years, I never had to think about my identity in relation to my marriage. Everybody saw me as queer. I saw myself as queer. What did I look like next to a man? Not myself, not queer. I needed to speak about his transition, but I wasn't able to. Not to our friends, my family. In spite of my husband's talking and talking about his transition, I didn't have language or vocabulary to respond to say my own things. He was becoming the person he always wanted to be, the person he always was. But in some way, I thought his transition erased our history, my history, and invented a new present for me. What do you think of my beard? My husband would ask me. I had nothing to say. He was so happy. I said, no good ever came from talking about anything. I put my hand over his mouth. Stop talking. Just shut up. Shut the fuck up.
I love it. That's so great. There's so many amazing things in there. Thanks for sharing that one. I was curious what section you were gonna read of it. Um, so you mentioned drafts. How many drafts did that go through?
Oh, that particular essay. Oh, no, of course, I thought it was done, about the first three times. And then when it got to Guernica, they were like, what are you talking about? You know? and um, And they thought some of the characters because, there's, like, one kind of fellowship in Berlin at Wannsee that some people might recognize themselves, and so I had to disguise that a little bit, but, I'd say a good 5, 6 versions,
Yeah.
you know?
One thread of it that I'd like to focus on because it's a question I ask people in our questionnaire, and I feel like people don't always know how to take it, which is, what do you think about the roles in a relationship? And it sounds like that was a very big thing for you guys to navigate because when you were I don't know, because people's roles change, right? Like, meaning who's gonna do the domestic stuff, who's gonna take care of the bank, who's gonna
Yeah.
take care and I'm really interested in those really quotidian things in a relationship, and yet people don't seem to always think about it.
No. We we didn't have too much conflict about that, except my husband, who used to cook, was now the guy with the refrigerator door opening "Do we have any eggs?" You know? While he's not looking in the refrigerator, he's looking over his shoulder. It it really was like something turned off in his
Mhm.
brain, and the things that I used to we used to track grocery lists together or, chores or something,
Yeah.
and then he okay, that's this I don't really believe in genetic attributes, but I don't know, he's did all the money. And he did it really well. He could do the taxes. He could do the things that, you know, I struggled with a lot.
Mhm.
You know, I was always running out of gas. Like, like really kind of silly things that he tracked, he paid attention to, which changed. I mean, it changed for the better when he
Right.
clicked in because that's when he started paying attention to all that.
Huh.
You know? He has tools now. Not a ice scraper for the roof, but, close enough.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's fascinating.
uh,
Um, so it's been a little less than a week than the whole book has been available for people. Have you had any reactions that you've been surprised by or how things are going?
let me see. Oh, I heard from a couple nieces
Oh.
who it surprised me that they read it. And they said, well, their dad is in one of the chapters called The Brother, and they said, "We were really scared to read it, but it wasn't bad. Like, it was just a little
Mhm.
sad." And, so that was a very much a welcome surprise. Um, and a couple people who thought, "Oh, we thought you were gonna write about, politicians and Stephen Miller and, and and all that." And I said, no." Like, the men that they hated, they thought, like, it was sort of universal, you know? And, so they were a little disappointed that it was more specific, to me. Not that I don't hate those guys, but, that
Why waste the time?
yeah.
Uh, do you feel like is can we talk about this idea of, because a lot of the book does deal with desire and the changes and how desire changes and how that has I mean, obviously, that changes over one's lifetime and as we age and as we change, but how has that changed for you now at this current point for both of you? Or for you?
Um, I'd say, it took some time and took, like, coming apart and then coming back together, and then mostly I had to be willing to be curious to what are the differences now?
Mhm,
How are we gonna relate now? And, um, and without that that curiosity, I think, things could have just been a closed door between us,
mhm,
and it wasn't that I was all loving and, welcome, back and all this. No. But we had more than a shared history. We have, like, kind of a shared cultural background, you know, um, working class Italian, Sicilian, and, a shared, aesthetic in terms of, like, art we like or writers we like, and, we've and a shared history of, like, raising dogs, which is
mhm,
which is not the same as raising children or anything, but, like, there were things we shared between us that we loved,
mhm.
you know, and that maintained a really strong connection between us, you know.
So then I'm gonna ask you the hard question, which is how do you define love? Because as you have explained, I mean, it is a thing that is beyond that hot, young
Um,
thing, and so tell me a little bit more about that. I mean, you've explored this. You've done a lot more work than most of us.
you know, I I think it's what for me, I I didn't wanna coast into old age, like, starting over. I didn't
Mhm.
want, you know, me, myself, and I all alone on you know, as I aged, I wanted to share that
Mhm.
with somebody who, was devoted to me in a lot of ways,
Right.
who understood me, who respected me. The history piece is a really big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard enough to find friends, as you get older. Like, who has time to go through all those stories, again? And, so I'd say something about longevity, uh, things in common, a shared, perspective on how you wanna live. We always wanted to live with, um, a little space around us, which is why we had to leave Boston, you know, that, and with like, enough room to entertain, to host, to, like, open the door, as we needed to friends and family. Those are things I don't know, you might call them shared values,
Yeah.
shared yeah.
I
Mm.
mean, it seems also one way that I like to think of it is the other person wants the best for you and you want the best for them, and you'll make, whatever sacrifices you need for the both of those things to happen. And
Or
it sounds like you've done
compromises.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Uh, and also I've been obsessed with this idea of the elasticity of queer relationships, and I feel like you both define that in such a great way. Because obviously sometimes that elastic can break. It
Right.
does, especially if it gets brittle.
Yep.
But you guys have shown that things can be elastic and you can go in and out and figure out new ways of putting yourselves together.
Yeah, I think it's possible if it may not be the easiest choice to make. Sometimes it's easier to, like, blow everything up, you know, and move on, and, but, it was the best choice for us,
Mhm.
you know, definitely.
So, if anyone who's joined us has any questions, feel free to ask. But I just want to remind people that Men I Hate is available now. It's a small book, but it has so much packed into it. And, it's really one of those things that I think people should be able to dip into it in random places and just read it. In some parts of it feel like prose poetry, you know what I mean? Like,
Oh,
it's really, really eloquently, structured and the writing is intense and amazing. So, thanks
good.
for putting all that time into it.
Very kind, Jerry. And then, maybe I'll mention if anybody is other writers, or, um, like, checking in, I'll be at AWP. I know, Queer Love Project will be as well. I'm on a panel on Saturday, afternoon, like, at 12 something, and it's
March 7th. Mhm.
yeah, and, also doing a couple table signings, one at Ohio State University. Everything's on the AWP schedule, and, if you heard this and you come to AWP, you know, introduce yourself and say hi.
It's gonna be exciting to meet you in person as well because 'cause we'll be there at the same time. Yeah, the whole AWP experience, for people who don't know, it's a writing and, publishing conference. It's happening in Baltimore, March 5th through the 7th. We're having Queer Love Project is having an event, a reading on the 6th that evening. But I didn't even know about it until last year, and we went for the first time, my co-editor, Michael Narkunsky, and it was such a intense and great experience. I met so many amazing people. And so I hope to get to some of the panels, but I really just go to meet all the people. It's like to have a whole bunch of word nerds, like, they say 10,000 of us, but there's a
Yeah.
lot.
A lot.
And and that's a lot because it's not normally the case. And next year it's gonna be in Chicago, and I know some people on the that have joined are there, and I'm looking forward to being able to go to the Midwest for it as well. But,
Yeah.
um, Lynette, this has been so amazing. I'm so glad that you agreed to join me and talk about this and share your words. Um, and I want more people to discover the book. It's really fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much for the invitation, Jerry. This has been a thrill, really.
All right. Well, we'll see each other in a couple weeks.
I hope so.
All right. Bye.